Images slow down your website massively, especially on slower internet connections. In here, I'm simulating fast 3G connection with about 10 high quality images, and the load speeds are worse than your grandma's dial-up connection. As you can see, we get these janky images that are loading top to bottom, and it's not looking very nice. To improve this, we can load smaller blurred out images first and then upscale them to full version once the site is fully loaded through the process of lazy loading. As you can see here, when the image is loading, it gets this temporary blurring animation that keeps blurring in and out, and once it's fully loaded, it will load the full image and nothing looks janky anymore. Also, only the first couple of images get loaded at first, and then when you scroll down, the rest of the images get loaded later. So only the images that are currently displayed on the screen get loaded in. To start out, I've got a simple project. It's got some basic styling to create a grid layout with our images inside, and I've got 10 high quality 4K images inside my images folder. We'll get to why I've got the small images down the line. The first thing that we want to improve is not having to load all the images at once and only loading the images that are currently displayed on the screen. As you can see in the networks tab, we load all 10 images straight away, which is kind of useless because we're not really looking at the images all the way down here, but we're still using up the bandwidth, which is pointless. To improve this, add lazy tag into all of your images. Now when we reload the website, we can see that it loads the first 8 images inside of it, and when we start scrolling down, the rest of the images slowly start to get loaded in the background as well. How do we get these blurred out images loading first and having this skeletal animation in there as well? Well, the first thing that we'll want to do is actually create these smaller little images that we're going to be loading first and then upscaling them to the larger images. In order to do that, we're going to use a common library called FFMPEG, which you can download from the official website for whatever operating system you're currently working on. We'll then use this command to downscale the image from an original massive size to a smaller size. Now we want to wrap our image inside of a div. This div will get a class of blurred image and we'll add the small image as the background for it. Repeat this action for all the rest of the images. All the images now completed, let's move on to the CSS. First thing to do is center in our image inside the grid. So we'll add the object position center and object fit cover to our image property. Next, we'll create the blurred image class. Inside of it, we want the background to be no repeat, and we want this small tiny little image to fit the entirety of this large image. And once we've got it centered, we'll blur it out by using the filter blur 10 pixels. Then we'll use a transition to show our real image later down the line. And this pulse animation will come in handy later. With the initial blurred out image, we want to create our final state, and we're going to be adding a class called image loaded onto all of our divs, which will get rid of our blur filter and the animation. Next up, we'll set the initial opacity of our images to 0 because they're not going to be visible at first, and instead we're going to be looking at the small image. With the initial opacity of 0 and the smaller image being visible, we then want to change the opacity to 1 for the image. So we'll set the opacity to 1 when the image is loaded and set the transition so that we have a nice animation in between. Lastly, we want to add a skeletal animation for when the image is actually loading. So we're going to see this pulsating blur happening whilst the image is loading between 2 and 10 pixels, which you'll see a bit later on, and it's going to be a bit more clear how it looks like. Now we actually have to apply this image loaded class onto our blurred image div. We're going to do that when our image is finally loaded. To do this, we're going to be using a bit of JavaScript. We'll place the script at the bottom of the document to make sure that all the elements are loaded before running the script. First, we'll need to select our blurred div. Once the divs are all selected, we want to cycle through all of them. We'll use the for each function to do this. Then we want to select our image inside the div. With the image selected, we'll check if the image is currently loaded. If the image is loaded, we'll add the image loaded class onto our div. And if the image is not loaded, we'll add an event listener to check for when the image is loaded and add the class to the div. With this script completed, we've now got everything for our lazy loaded images to work properly. Heading back to the site, refresh the page and have a look if everything's working correctly. And as you can see, we get this pulsating animation. If I change the speed to fast 3G again, we get this pulsating animation with the blur coming in and out whilst the image is loading. You might want to decrease the values or play around with it a little bit, but it works fine for me. Hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.